If Chet Baker and Miles Davis played the same note on the trumpet, could you tell it apart? Same goes for sax players. And how about piano players? But then again, if you heard Mariah Carey and Bono sing the same note, you could tell them apart, right? Today we're talking about voicing a piano. Stick around. Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center in downtown San Antonio, Texas.
I'm Patrick Mari. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channels, check out our other videos, sign up for notifications, like our videos, leave us comments. We really appreciate the support, and we love to interact with you guys. Well, Ted, this is a big topic, but it's a question I feel like a lot of people want to know the answer to. What is piano voicing, and why is it so important?
Well, piano voicing makes the piano prepared and ready for sound as the artist asked for it, believe it or not.
Well, and I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions behind what piano voicing is too, because for a lot of people looking for a piano, they go and they hit a note and they're like, oh, too bright, too dark, too muddy.
Too something.
Too much something, yeah.
This is the nice thing about voicing is that everyone has their opinion on it. And I never did tell you the story, but I'm going to give this as an example.
Live on camera.
Live on camera, a story that I started telling you about last week when I played a backwards piano.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you remember that story?
Yeah.
It was a piano bar in the 90s in Houston. They had a whole bunch of clubs under one roof, and they decided to open up a piano bar, so they made the two pianos. They were empty cases with digital pianos inside them. And instead of having the spine go down the left, the piano I had was a mirror image. The spine went down the right, which means the high notes were real long on this piano and the case went backwards. So if I saw myself playing in a mirror, it was okay because everything was flipped.
Wow.
They actually built the cases backwards and a carpenter put the legs on the wrong side. He should have flipped it over and made the piano. I actually had more than one person, particularly women, tell me that that piano was out of tune and that piano needed to be tuned and it was voiced wrong and there was something wrong with it.
And it was a digital piano?
And it was a digital piano. It was in perfect equal temperament tuning. There was nothing wrong with it other than it looked wrong. And it felt wrong playing that piano. I'm telling you, if you sit at a grand piano and the thing goes long this way and it's curved this way, it's like, man, this ain't right.
There's something backwards
There's
here.
something entirely
Something's not right here.
Okay, so that idea based on voicing, we know going into it. People already have an opinion about pianos, the tone, the timbre, the everything, before they ever even hear it. And if something is a digital instrument and it's precisely on tune with a strobe tuner, how can you tell the piano's out of tune? It's not. There's something else that's wrong. And
it's our brains?
It's our brains. I'm guessing it's our brains. But now here's another thing. And I had mentioned, like you hear Miles Davis or Chet Baker play a note on a piano. You can do the same thing for piano players. If you listen to a lot of solo piano players, I mean, there are some that particularly the minute you hear 2 or 3 notes, and it's a brand new album they came out with, a brand new composition, something you never heard from an artist that you're aware of, you can tell right away. It's this guy or this guy or this guy. And the same applies to saxophone players and to trumpet players. But why is it like that on a piano? And something that we've been missing around here for the last year because of COVID was not providing a whole lot of pianos for events, particularly the big concert events we used to have. And in years past, we would always do Chick Corea's piano because he was a Yamaha artist and he came with a 5.5-page concert writer on how that piano had to be set up. Plus, you had to have at least a 92 or above on your piano guild test in order to touch and tune and temper a piano for Chick Corea for one of his events, whether it's a recording or a concert. George Winston is close to the same. I don't know that he's particularly big on the guild technician, but talking to him, I do know he likes a piano that's favored tuned to D, the low D, as opposed to the C, and so that it rings great in the key of D and the key of G. And it has certain notes that need to be certain frequencies and tempered certain ways.
Wow.
So certain notes based on his compositions, he wants certain things done with. And George Winston is probably the best example of piano voicing. If you're familiar with one or two or all of his recordings, this guy puts his arm on the thing and does these kind of rhythmic patterns.
Leans
and
over, okay.
He's dampening the strings. What is that? He's voicing that instrument so it sounds different.
He's like palm muting.
He's palm muting, then he forearm mutes, and then he has a way to do it in the bass notes. And then he has a way to lift and let that one note ring. And then he'll go doing other things. And it's, sometimes I listen to him, and even when you see him in concerts, like, it sounds like three people are fooling around with that piano. And it's just him. But you can hear a multitude of sounds in there.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see what someone as a player can do voicing their own instrument. So that's kind of to your point of these really great musicians, Miles Davis, you know, playing his trumpet is going to be different because he's going to play it differently. He could be playing the same exact trumpet. But when you think about a piano, it's kind of the marriage of the player with the technician.
It is, but the technician is supposed to allow the player's, believe it or not, soul to come through the mechanism, through the hammer, and the player's soul is supposed to make that string vibrate. Okay, and the
soul
way,
or energy,
or their spirit or their energy. So when someone touches here, you need that human expression from here to affect the way these strings vibrate. Now, there's been a lot of tests, and there are some theories, and they do have classes that they teach in college, that your breath and your being and your own personal vibration affects everything about you, including the way you play an instrument, as opposed to the way someone else plays an instrument. And so that your being will emit a certain frequency that affects these strings that no one else's does. This is like the real deep psychology of like, and I had these conversations with a number of professional pianists that you know as well. I'm not going to mention their names, okay? Because I know so many of them, they're going to all start thinking one another is a weirdo, okay? But this is something that they do study in master classes, okay? Is that, and as there's some quote where Bill Evans talks about, as you breathe is how you play. And that gets back into the idea of Miles Davis, and your whole existence is part of the instrument. Is that voicing? Not really. Setting the string to a certain vibration, adjusting the hammers. This is the biggest, one of the biggest aspects of voicing a piano is going to be, number one, besides the string tensions, because some artists like different tensions on the same note, even though there's 2 or 3 of them in the range. It could be the bass, they want them a little off. But the hammers and how they work. And one of the worst problems we used to have with our 9-foot concert grand piano, regardless of the manufacturer, was that one night you would have a guy that wanted this thing to be as hard as granite, and the next night someone is going to want it there to be like a feathery down, sheep, real nice and soft. So the wool on a piano is very exceptional. And the higher grade and the more expensive the piano, the higher the capability of that hammer and that wool to elicit change from one artist to another. And there does come a point sometimes if they've had too much plastic juice put in them, they just have to be replaced.
Yeah.
They got to go.
Time for
For the player, the first thing about voicing that players notice is the sustain pedal. You pick this up and the whole instrument rings like an open harp. And that changes all the sounds. It makes all the frequencies bleed and blend together. That is a voicing effect. You hear it a lot. Sometimes you just open up the harp and play long, whole half notes and let them ring and let the natural reverb come in. I opened one of my albums that way. The other thing too is that you can use the damper pedal, and which is the far left pedal, is going to shift the string, actually shift the action away, so that you're not going to be hitting center on, you're going to be hitting some of the softer parts of the hammer. Those are the 2 voicing effects that a player has available to him, besides giving the technician details on what to do with the hammer. Now, there are other things that some artists really get into, is how, particularly a lot of your classical artists, is when the sustain actually lifts. They want a different lift off of the treble than they do off of the bass. Obviously, you want a faster, lift and release. in the treble section, especially if you're a classical person or a jazz artist. So this can affect the tone. And if you've ever played a piano that's out of service and you find where one of these barely lift, it does have a pretty neat effect on the voicing. If there's a section where they're all like that, it gets more rhythmic because it's
punchy.
It's kind of palm muted.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of muted. And you can do partial pedaling, which allows to pick some of these up and let that string vibrate, not 100% freely, but restricted vibration underneath.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of unique things that players have to develop on their own, and one of them is basically something that would allow this hammer to move, and that's almost like pumping the damper pedal.
Yeah. No, I think there's so many cool tools that a pianist can go out and change their instrument mid-performance or mid when they're writing a piece or things like that. They can take advantage of some really cool things. Well, yeah, holding the damper pedal is something we always recommend on a piano, especially a used one. Kind of helps you reset the piano if played a lot and the hammer is a little bit harder, right, where it's directly striking each time. If you hold that damper pedal, it shifts over ever so slightly. You're getting a little more fresh part of a hammer that hasn't kind of solidified with time and with consistency of playing. But this is I guess the question on my mind is, with piano voicing, with a great technician, are you able to make a brighter piano darker, or a darker piano brighter? And I think the root of this question kind of comes from what we see in a lot of these digital pianos. So we have a digital piano behind us, and I will use Kawai as an example because we've done a lot of videos on some of the Kawai product, but they actually have a process called Virtual Technician, and they have some presets in there, and you can be on their SKEX, which is their 9-foot concert grand. It's a very high quality sample of that SKEX, and you can actually go through some different voicings. And so you see this word voicing come up in digital pianos a lot, and you can go through and you're playing the same SKEX every time, but you're clicking through and it's called, they have different names for it, like brilliant and romantic, and the full sound.
Right.
And what are those changes, and can those happen on
a real piano?
On a real piano.
Yeah, the first thing, since you mentioned voicings and that, is I do want to mention there are a number of artists that started in the 60s. Not necessarily avant-garde, but with the creation of putting together these patchworks of sounds that were called, sort of like number 9, Revolution 9.
Is that when acid was invented?
Well, yeah, around that time. But there's sometimes, if you've ever looked at an old rock album and they have a phrase on there, prepared piano or tack piano, they use tack piano a lot. What is that? They put TAC piano. It would actually put brass tacks in the hammers so that piano was bright like a honky-tonk and would cut through the recording, especially if you're in a room and you're recording live. And then I believe that even Lyle Mays and Philip Glass did concerto for prepared pianos. There's a lot of artists that like, what is a prepared piano? Well, he'll deliberately go in and have it tuned a certain way, which may not be what the normal tuning is. So it's an alternative tuning. They may put paper clips on some of the strings. They may put tacks on some of these. A lot of times they use wax paper. So they get a fuzz sound, and they would twist wax paper with twist ties around certain strings so that when you're playing, it almost sounds like a few notes in there or a snare drum. So it's got some buzz to it. Or they put some screen material across the string so that it creates this counter, nothing that goes with the music.
It's like texture.
It's just texture, okay? So that is an extremely voiced piano. Now, on a voicing, some of those things you can get, you can get a higher pitched or a higher timbre toned piano, or a muddier or a shallower sounding piano by tuning, but it's very, very lengthy process, and you have to pay a technician to do it. But not to the extremes at which you have on the Virtual Technician. Some of the items that you get on the Virtual Technician are really interesting because, like I said, it's as if you had different record producers in there creating the ambiance for the sound system, which is what I really like, because it made those certain things on the Virtual Technician stand out. If it's like soft, hard, prepared, ready, medium, they have these descriptions. So when you play the piano, it's like, I can see where they're coming from. Yeah. And you either like or dislike, or you make note of the change, and then you realize, on this song, that would be perfect. On that type of song, that would be perfect. With rain, this would be ideal. That reverb goes on forever. And so those kind of things are great, and you cannot do that on an acoustic instrument alone. One of the wildest things, there was an album, I can't remember the band, but instead of using reverb on their album, they used, it was a piano, they had turned it up on its side and had an open harp, and they just ran all their vocals through the open harp and used an open harp sustaining strings as their reverb.
Right? It's like plate reverb, but with an actual
It's like a, well, it's a
soundboard.
harmonically blurred, because the notes that you sing will stand out and you hold, but then you start getting, if you slide into a note, you start getting all the ambient strings next to it hitting the vibration. So it's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
But the voicings on the Kawai digital piano are just,
They're great, yeah.
they're just awesome.
And I've had technicians come in and look at some of the pianos that we have here. You know, they'll start with something that is overly bright, and a lot of the times that's not the true nature of that piano, because there's a lot of things that work. It's not just this is what it sounds like, this is what you get. But what are the actual measures that a technician takes to voice a piano down or voice it up? Can you talk about that? Like what they do to hammers? Because I mean, you look up voicing online, and you're like, how do if I get a used piano and I might need to get it tuned, regulated, and voiced, is that kind of thing that? So the tuning obviously is getting it up to pitch. The regulation is everything mechanical going on, and then that third voicing thing, I think, is what can a technician do to a piano, and how fluid can it get?
The idea would be, let's just say you are a pianist with a symphony orchestra, and tomorrow night's the concert, and it features a lead. There's a violin virtuoso that's going to be there. If you're a technician, and whoever is the technician for that symphony on that piano is going to get called, and he's going to ask what's going on with the piano. Because you tune a piano entirely different for a classical concert, depending upon who's playing the lead instrument. And naturally, it's a lot of times it's the violin, and each violinist, sometimes they have different things that they favor. They may like it a certain way all the time, but at the same time, maybe tonight they're playing a weird piece in a different key. Here's one thing that piano technicians encounter a lot. A piano that's used a lot, a whole lot, the white keys are going to sound entirely different than the black keys, because most of the players that are going to be using a lot, like in a club or a sing-along club, almost all the white keys are going to be brighter than the black keys, because the players just don't play on the black keys that much. In a pop club, in a piano bar, it's almost all simple type chords. It's rare that you get an excessive use of the black keys, other than for swipes, which means all the pounding is going on in a white key. So those are naturally brighter. And if you're going to use that piano tomorrow night for a concert, you want the black and white balanced. They're very simple. When I was a kid growing up, that was a real obvious difference. These are ding, ding, boom, boom. They were kind of muddier. So the first thing they would have to do is either one, harden the black keys to bring them up to par with the white keys, or soften all of the white keys to bring them in balance with all of the black keys. If it's classical, the best thing to do is probably bring it down and just let the whole piano be kind of more mid-rangey.
And so they do that.
And so they can do that.
How do they, for those watching, how do they voice it?
The way that's voiced
Voice it down.
is they'll spend a certain amount of time on the hammer. And ideally the way to do it is you poke in sideways. Of course, you can't do this on a grand piano unless you pull the action back and pull it out. So they poke sideways and they poke down. So they're actually creating, it's kind of like if you're poking holes in your lawn in the springtime, so your water and your fertilizer and everything will go down into the dirt. That's kind of the idea what they do here. And then the last, they'll poke deep down inside, and then toward the end, as they finish up that note, they'll poke on more toward the top surface. Sometimes you'll actually see them poke and pull up, just so they kind of take some of the tension off of the wool, and then you play that note, and it has a different tone. And then you have to go in and play passages after you work on it. And they spend a few minutes on each hammer and there's 88 of them on a piano.
Yeah, it takes some
remember,
time.
56 of them are white, okay, and so, or 52 of them are white. The other 36 are black keys, and so a lot of times, the black keys are, like I said, they're not played as much, particularly on a piano that's like in a church or a piano that's a public access piano, because almost everyone knows how to play something on the white keys, but to play something a lot on the black keys, a lot of people don't know. So that is a big tonal difference in variance. Again, on the pianos, you tune the piano different for a violin concerto, say a 3 or 4 hour program, as opposed to you would for a rock concert. A rock concert, I mean, hey man, just tune it loud, make it bright, make it loud.
And then how do they make the hammers brighter?
When they make them brighter, there's a couple of ways to do them, but primarily what they're doing is they have this little fluid that they put in there that is a hardener, and they inject the hardener again into the deeper part of the hammer. Okay, now sometimes as a piano gets really old and the hammers are falling apart, they may just put some of that across the top. So, but it's not the same effect as putting a tack in it.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's going to harden it up to where you're going to get more of a solid, as opposed to a giving wool hitting the string.
Okay, so there is some variance you can give to a piano to make it.
The timbre on each string. The problem with it is that you have to balance all of those strings. And remember, when you're hitting one note in a treble, there's 3 strings there, and there's 3 sections of the hammer that have little grooves in it where they hit.
And all of those need to be adjusted.
And all those need to be adjusted, and then in between those 3 grooves from the lines, there's those spaces, and those things, you really want those soft so that when you hit your damper pedal and it moves over, you can literally hear and feel the shift in the hammer as you're playing it to where it's hitting the softer part. That, along with your damper pedal, gives you about as much voicing control as you can have over the instrument.
Yeah.
And adding your open strings and your sustain pedal.
Very cool. Very cool.
So it is different. On the electrics,
Everything is.
they can exaggerate and exemplify and do almost anything that you want done to a string.
Yeah, especially with that modeling technology that we've talked about, is they're able to kind of exaggerate these things and really kind of pull out some really cool features. And that's one of the cool things about digital pianos nowadays. You're able to be that technician, and the touch of a button, you just did what would take a couple hours to do over the 88 keys. So very cool. So I mean, this is purely conversational about what voicing is, what can be done from the player's perspective versus the technician's perspective, and what that means to the player, what it means to you. If you're interested in pianos and interested in piano technology, this is a topic that we kind of just wanted to cover. And Ted, thank you again for...
These are instrument voicings, not necessarily chord or playing voicing, which is I mean, that's...
Another, yeah.
We didn't even talk about putting hands on the piano.
I know, and so it's very cool. So this is kind of what an instrument can be to a player when it comes to, little tricks that you can be doing as the player, and what a technician can be doing to voice your piano. So hopefully this, clears what voicing can be and how wide the topic can be when you're kind of discussing with, if you're looking at an instrument, or if you're talking to a technician, if you have a piano, if you're looking at a piano. These are conversations that can be had, and really kind of the potential of what an instrument can be to a pianist. And so just very interesting. Hope you guys found it enjoyable. Ted, again, piano historian here. So really interesting to hear, your experience and what you've seen over the years, and kind of what's cool about the instrument. So thank you again. This is Ted Barcelou. I'm Patrick Marr with Alamo Music Center in San Antonio. If you have any questions, if you have any cool stories about voicing, please let us know. Leave a comment. I'm sure people will love to read it. Just really cool potential with these instruments. Again, it's 10,000 parts moving all together to create a beautiful sound and contain energy, and it's a lot of fun. So thank you guys for watching.